I have done a search in Apple Computer's video archives and have found the August 1988 user group connection video which might be useful. It contains the following segments: AppleFest keynote speakers, Project 2000, Macintosh solutions for elected officials, and an interesting application of HyperCard. Would you like to see it now?
Yes, that would be fine.
And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, the legendary co-founder of Apple Computer, Steve Wozniak.
Thank you very much for your warm reception. I'd like to apologize in advance for a sore throat. It seems that a virus has hit me. I come out here today to Boston, where I've got a lot of good computer friends. Some of the finest people in our business have come from here. I come from Cupertino, which is the home of the greatest revolution of our times. I grew up in Silicon Valley, home of transistors and integrated circuits is why it's called Silicon Valley. And there were a lot of electronics parents, a lot of electronics kids. We read Tom Swift books, stories like the Hardy Boys, except it was about this inventor named Tom Swift, who had his own company, who had his own laboratory. I would sit there reading these books about how ingenious he was and how resourceful he was to solve any problem in the world, to build any device that was needed to trap aliens from outer space or to send anti-earthquake pulses through the earth. Would read these stories by moonlight after my parents made me turn my own lights off. So Tom Swift was our hero. A lot of times when you're very young, you read a book and it kind of gives you inspiration. The heroes you identify with lead you on your path in life. Read a book in about 5th grade called SOS at Midnight, about a guy who had a ham radio license. And he was in high school, and a bunch of his friends would get on the air every Tuesday night at midnight and send messages back and forth in Morse code with telegraph keys, beep, 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 beep. He got kidnapped in the book. He was able to rewire the kidnapper's TV, build a transmitter, transmit a message to his friends, and they were able to come and rescue him. Went to school the next day and told my friends, I'm going to be a ham radio operator. And sure enough, by 6th grade, I had a ham radio license. A lot of these little directions, things like science fair successes and all, kind of determine your direction in life. And it all happens when you're young. Most teachers tell me that it's like around by 3rd, 4th grade, they can tell which students have decided to kind of be dropouts and always act like school's not important and I'm too tough for this, and which ones are really bright and they want to learn and they want to study and discover new things. My friend Alan Baum was my only friend. He went off to MIT and would ship me manuals from the courses he was taking, and I would read all of his books, and I learned a lot that way. He told me there's a club starting for people who have terminals and things. I said, great, I just designed a terminal. I can go down to this club and tell everybody I've got a terminal of my own design, a video terminal. I didn't even know that there were a couple of other people designing video terminals back in that date, like Don Lancaster, who had the TV terminal, which was a hot product in the hobbyist community. Because I'd gotten out of the electronics hobby community. I didn't read their magazines. I didn't know that what a microcomputer was. I didn't know what a microprocessor was. I didn't know that a microcomputer had recently been introduced that was spurring this thing to happen. If I had known that the first microcomputer club in the United States was about to start, I would have been afraid to go because I was very shy and scared of kind of unknown territory. I would have skipped it. But my friend lied to me and told me it was a meeting for people with terminals, so I went. 20 people met in a dark garage with the rain dripping outside the garage, and Gordon French's garage. He stood up front and explained what these upcoming computers were and why the 8008 microprocessor might still have a lot of value, even though the 8080 was superior. And other people got up and started talking about this 8080 chip that I'd never heard of, and how a company out in New Mexico had built it into a cheap computer that people could buy and build it as a kit. You would buy it as a kit, get all the parts, You'd stuff them in boards, solder them together, bolt transformers in place, screw the whole thing together, put a front panel on, solder wires to switches. You had to be a technician to build it, but when you were done, you had a computer. Couldn't do one useful thing in the world, but it was a computer. And there were a lot of people that were going to want this kind of thing even before they could use it for anything. They started talking about these products at this homebrew computer club, as it became known as later on. And I sat there feeling very sheepish. How do these high school kids and how do these grandparents know all these things that are going on? And they know mnemonics and codes and processors, and I don't even know a thing about this. So I was very sheepish, but I took a data sheet home with me that night, and I studied a microprocessor chip, and by morning, I knew that a microprocessor was just like a mini computer, except it was smaller and all on one chip. But it had the same kinds of instructions and the same kind of computer logic, and I had studied these things and designed my own and built them, and I knew what they were about. I had written a lot of software for them, even though I never had one to run it on. So this changed my life quite a bit. I decided to get back into computers. And I knew that now I was going to actually own my own computer, like I had promised myself when they cost as much as a house. That now I could afford it, especially if I built my own. It was very difficult to come up with $400 in 1975, which is a lot more of today's dollars, to buy a little computer that kind of has 256 bytes of memory. And then you've got to spend another $400 for some memory, and another $800 for a terminal, and another $800 for basic. I didn't have this kind of money, but I knew that at least if I built the computer myself, I could get a lot of the parts for free. And I already had designed a video terminal, which could be the heart of a computer. The first thought that occurred to me was all these other computers are big old boxes with a flat square metal plate and a bunch of toggle switches on them. And that didn't seem right, because here I had a video terminal, and it was so convenient to call big computers in Boston and run programs on them with this terminal. And so I came up with the idea in my head that the right paradigm for a microcomputer was a terminal, a keyboard to enter information in. And you could start typing if you had a small program like we had in our calculators, a small program that when you turn it on, it starts looking at the keyboard and says what key gets pressed. You press the 5 key, and it goes off and it tucks a 5 into memory somewhere and maybe displays it on a screen. And then it says what key's going to get pressed, and you press a 6 and it does something with the 6, and you press the return key and that means go do something. If you write a little program in ROM memory, non-destructible memory, and you deliver it with the computer, it took many fewer chips and much lower cost to read a keyboard in than the huge number of chips you had to put in to operate with a front panel anyway. This kludgy front panel where you had to toggle strange binary numbers on switches took more chips to get into the computer and make the computer operate according to when you push buttons on the panel than if you simply had a keyboard that could send commands directly into a program that would do it for you. So the idea was a computer should look like a terminal. It should have a keyboard and a TV screen. And of course, I was into what would I use a computer for? Well, there were two obvious things. When you went to open house at Stanford Linear Accelerator Center or Stanford this and that or any other computer place, what did they show on computers in 1975? These big, huge machines, that there was a computer elite, there was a mystique about them, nobody could have their own. What did they show to families on open house day? Games. And of course, at my homebrew computer club, there was a flood of books showing games written in BASIC. And this was going to be the accepted default standard for microcomputers at its start. So I knew that first of all, I wanted to be able to run games written in the BASIC language. Also, I had certain types of computer design problems that I did for Hewlett-Packard for my job. And I wanted to be able to implement those programs and run the ones that would help me in my design work. The Homebrew Computer Club, I was starting to spin ideas of what I would do with a computer, and I knew I was going to build one, but there was one problem. The heart of the computer, the microprocessor chip, cost $400. That's like $1,000 today. That's a lot to pay for one chip that's the heart of your computer. You're not likely to do it if you're just on your own and you got holes in your jeans and that's all you wear and you're just a long-haired technician kind of at work. So I wasn't going to go down to some weird little distributor who wants me to sign up on all these sheets that make it look like I'm setting up an account and I'm giving information about my bank, which generally has $20 in my account. And it's a strange world when you're used to buying things, at the grocery store over the counter. You don't feel comfortable. You're not a businessman. You don't know what these accounts are all about. So it was very difficult for someone like myself to buy a microprocessor. Well, a company called MOS Technology got started, and they introduced a microprocessor called the 6502 in such a way that in San Francisco at an electronics show, they would sell it over the counter for a $20 bill. And this was a remarkable marketing coup, and a lot of my friends from Hewlett-Packard, a lot of friends from the computer club who couldn't afford one before, went down and bought that $20 chip, and that's how we chose it. And it claimed to be the best chip of its day anyway, which I still agree. The personalities of our computer club. It was the first one in the country. Some of the key leaders, including our eventual meeting conductor, Lee Felsenstein, and Robert Riley, and some others, they had come from a background of leading anti-Vietnam War demonstrations in the Berkeley area and Oakland area. And they had come to discover that they needed a better way to network people and have communication tools. And they envisioned the computer as the eventual solution, the way that people could, via electronic bulletin boards, leave messages and I need this, and eventually expand their database and their knowledge. And they wanted to organize this kind of operation. They saw computers as a socialization tool. Others of those who founded the company saw it as a technology changing tool, and we were going to revolutionize the world and turn the tables upside down on companies that pretended that computers were big and enormous and beyond our understanding. Now we realize that young children in school, young 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds, were going to be writing better programs than their parents, and suddenly discovering that, hey, computer isn't that much of a mystique after all. It's really simple, and anybody can do it. So Lee Felsenstein would conduct the meetings. He did a very good job. Organized us into mapping periods where people would raise their hand and say, does anyone have this sort of thing? This is what I need, a type of chip or an interface schematic, or know how you fix this problem. Other people would raise their hand and say, I've got some RAMs for sale today, $2 each, or I've got some manuals on this, I've got a certain type of teletype for sale. People would offer things, and what you'd do is if somebody offered something you needed, you'd look at them, raise their hand, you'd see who it is, and you'd meet with them later during the random access period. If someone needed help on something and you could offer help, you'd go meet with them during the random access period. And we were all there to help each other see what this revolution was all about. And we used the word revolution very openly. All the companies, everything that was printed in the financial sections of the newspapers in 1975 said it's a bunch of kids driving around in beat-up VW vans. This thing's never going anywhere. These computers don't have a marketplace. It's just a little fad, for the hobbyist community. But we started realizing that people were going to have computers in their homes, and that it was just starting, and that the big companies didn't see it. Jim Warren came to our club meetings, and he had some experience with a company called People's Computer Company, involved a lot in getting educational software out to the masses. And he had rumor after rumor after rumor, every single tidbit about what company was going to come out with this product, and so over there, this executive was leaving to join some other firm, a new microprocessor was about to be introduced. He always knew every tidbit of information weeks before we normally heard it. So half of the meeting was consumed listening to these interesting little tidbits about the industry that was evolving from Jim Warren. This was the most important. Every 2 weeks we met, Wednesday night, 7:30 p.m. This was the most important every 2 weeks of my life, to get ready for this meeting and to hinge on every word and listen, because I was too shy to ever raise my hand and speak myself. I was not really a participant yet. My friend Dan Sokol, whom I met there, would go up to the front of the auditorium sometimes and say, is there anyone here from Atari? No hands would go up. He'd say to 500 people, he'd say, well, I've got some chips from a Pong game they're going to come out with for their home, and it's not quite on the market yet, but we're going to auction them off. We had there was kind of a pirate aspect to it. Nothing ever seemed wrong to us. Later on, the people who eventually formed Microsoft introduced the first BASIC for these small computers. You buy the computer for $400, you buy the BASIC for $600. Doesn't sound very efficient. Okay, this is from Bill Gates. Well, Dan Sokol took a copy of it on paper tape that you could read in with a big, huge teletype, took it home, came back with 20 copies. Okay? And the rule of the club sort of became, anything you take out of the library, you have to bring 2 or more back. Randy Wigington was a high school kid who eventually became very important in Apple's early history. And although he was just in high school, he was sharp, he was at the club, he had a lot of good questions and comments, and I met him there. And he would help me carry my big Sears TV in and set it down on a table where I could demonstrate my computer work as I started designing computers for the club. Randy was in charge of running a chat program on a local time-sharing company where people with terminals could all call in and talk to each other, much like today's forums, much like, even forums on the new Apple link. Well, I discovered that this program that did this chatting used a file. I read the program written in BASIC, used a file called chatx to pass the information one person was typing to everyone else that was listening. So I wrote a program of my own that sat there in a little loop and said, is chatx free? Is chatx free? As soon as it was, grabbed it and dumped 14 pages of Pollock jokes into it. Another youngster I met at this club, Chris Espinosa, became very important in Apple's history, going way back to its earliest days, before we even started, right on through today. He still works at Apple, one of our longest-term employees. We were about to come out with the Apple II in an eventual year. I'll skip ahead and tell this. The Apple II, and Chris stayed all night with me writing the first demonstration program ever to use high-res color demonstration program on the Apple II computer for a magazine article so we could get some pictures. So we stayed there till 2, 3, 4 in the morning making little changes to it to swirl lines around on a screen. Chris went home kind of late. He lived down the street. And his mother got so upset at him coming home that late because he was only like 15 or 16, that she wouldn't let him come to Apple for a long time. Most of the people in our club were very scraggly. They weren't dressed certainly in suits. They weren't managers. They weren't the people who even had good access to computers. They were the ones that wanted computers of their own. They were all technicians. Very few of us could afford a computer. After about 1 year of the club operating, with every single person out of 500 gonna own a computer, only about 5 to 8 of us had our own computers yet. The newsletter, we had a newsletter. People would give little program listings. Here's how you can write a program to calculate a random number. Here's how you can write. They were very simple, trivial programs at first, but it inspired others of us to believe that anything you do has value if you want to share it. So I started writing programs and sharing them through this club newsletter with other people, or handing out my own schematics or my own programs so that other people could build their own projects. I handed out schematics of my terminals. Eventually, when I built the Apple I, I handed out schematics of that. Went over to people's houses and helped them build their own. We believed that there wasn't any money in this. This was not a business. We were doing it for the love of technology, and we were changing the world. And this was just our little step on the way.
It is my great pleasure this morning to introduce to you Del Yoakum, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Apple Computer. He is the man responsible for guiding Apple's day-to-day operations, including advanced technology, product development, worldwide sales, marketing and distribution, worldwide manufacturing and operations, and information systems and technology. It's quite a handle. Since joining Apple in 1979, Mr. Yoakum has been a major force in its growth from a young startup to a $3 billion plus corporation. From its inception, Apple has been a company with a passion to change the world, a passion driven by a vision of the vast potential of the human mind. We're here today to see and to celebrate the creativity and innovation which are the fruits of that vision. We're very pleased to have Del Yoakum, a man who helped make the Apple II the leading computer in schools around the world, a man who helped open up the Macintosh to be more accessible to developers, to open our festivities here today. Mr. Yoakum is here to share with you some thoughts about the past, how far we've come, and the future, the challenge of what can be, how computers can change the way we work, think, and learn, and how the relationship between people and their computers can truly change the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Del Yoakum.
Thank you, and good morning. From the moment the first Apple I was built, our company has been immersed in change, driving the process of change, driven by a belief in the possibility of real change in the world. About a year ago, a few of us at Apple sat down and tried to put down on paper exactly what the essential characteristics of our company are. I got to tell you, it wasn't an easy task. But after much inward and outward examination, we decided on the following 3 traits. First, that we make the best personal computer products, period. Second, that we create an exciting environment in which to work to learn, and to communicate. And third, that we have a passion to change the world. Today, I'd like to talk about that third characteristic, our passion for changing the world, and how it's reflected in what we do at Apple. In fact, I think that third characteristic drives the first two. Since that first Apple I was introduced, and over this last decade, the world has changed. Of course, we can't take full credit for changing the world, no matter how much we'd like to. But we'd like to think our products have at least shaken it up a bit. Personal computers have come a long way. From one machine that was built to show the homebrew computer club that some kind of personal computer was a possibility, to personal computers with the power of mainframes. And Apple has come a long way too. From a couple of guys in a garage with a questionable credit line, Apple has become, in 11 years, a Fortune 200 company with sales of $3+ billion a year. And Apple has also changed in other respects. We are now a company that belongs to a lot of people in a lot of different ways. We belong to our stockholders, to our employees, to our third-party developers, without whom nobody would have a reason to use a computer in the first place. But most of all, in a way that is recorded on no financial ledgers or stock tape or contract, we belong to the whole community of Apple users. That's what we're here to celebrate today, our community, how it's been changed by the personal computer revolution and the amazing achievements in personal creativity, productivity, and education that have resulted. Of course, much of Apple's early success is due to how we changed the way people could communicate with their computers. We thought that it should be as easy for people to get their computers to do relatively complex things, and we used innovative technologies to make that possible. Now, we wanted a task on an Apple computer to be so easy that even a child could do it. And as you know, several million did. So we've changed the relationship people have with the computer on the desk in front of them by making tools that allow people to concentrate on the task itself, not on the tool used to perform it. But as information becomes the dominant commodity, and the task we face in education, business, and in our personal pursuits become more and more complex, we've also begun to change the way Apple users communicate with other people. We've proclaimed 1988 as the year of networking and communications at Apple. And since the beginning of the year, we've witnessed a whole series of events which reflect that focus. Among them is Apple's introduction of a series of products that extend the power of the AppleTalk networking systems to the classroom. Products designed to give educators a simple but powerful way to communicate with each other. And we introduced the Apple CD-SC, our CD-ROM drive, to allow for quick access to high volumes of data, including text, graphics, and digitized music. So we've begun to change the way Apple users access information and communicate with other people. Now we want to extend that change to include the way that they can communicate with Apple itself. Up until now, users only wanted to communicate with computer manufacturers for one of two reasons. One, because they needed additional product information, or two, because they needed to have something fixed. That was about it. But we want to change that relationship. We want to go from being a source of product and support information to being a source of all kinds of information to enhance your experience on an Apple II. So we've introduced a product to help get that information to you with a minimal of hassle. It's called the Apple Link Personal Edition, an online service that allows you to communicate directly with Apple corporate offices, other Apple users, and information services. And we've made it available first on the Apple II product line. What Apple Link does is what Apple has always wanted its technology to do. It empowers individuals to explore on their own and to give them the opportunity to communicate and share their discoveries in a community. It's a powerful electronic mail facility. It enables you to sample new software. And with a live connection to all other online users, you can engage in a real-time chat or send each other instant private messages or flash notes. You can join special interest forums on any subject, from baseball to electronic music, or you can start one yourself. The possibilities are limited only by your imagination. You can listen to special guest speakers like Steve Wozniak in the online auditorium. And you can get online news, shopping services, continuing education, and many other services. We believe it will transform the relationship of Apple's users to Apple and to each other. After all, if two heads are better than one, how much better are the combined powers of over 5 million, each of them supported by an Apple computer? Changes in work styles and changes in communications that make information more accessible and useful are all significant. One of our primary research projects is the Apple Classroom of Tomorrow, or ACOT. And of all the research efforts we have going on at Apple, this is the one that's closest to me in spirit. When I want to get a glimpse of what education might look like, when I want to see some of the innovative ways computers might augment learning in the future, I go to one of several ACOT sites across the country. In its first phase, ACOT was designed to answer a relatively simple question. How would education change if everyone had access to computers 24 hours a day? But now, in its second phase of research, we're asking a much more subtle question about the relationship of computers to education. Exactly how can computers best be used to better the shape of the learning process? This is a vital question, not just for us, but for American education. And we're going to have to keep asking it if we're going to develop the hardware and software and communications technology that will meet the needs of students and educators in the coming years. We've set up model classrooms across the country, cutting across regional and economic boundaries. And we gave each student a computer to use at school and one to take home. And then we listened. We listened to what the students and what the teachers had to say about the experience and how computers were changing the way that they learned and the way that they taught. Here's what some of the students at an Apple Classroom of Tomorrow in Memphis, Tennessee, have to say about how they learn.
I pledge allegiance to the
In many ways, the Apple Classroom of Tomorrow is very familiar. Children still read books, still use paper and pencils, still listen to the teacher, and still love recess. But something else is happening in these classrooms. Something a little like magic.
It's a wonderful experience having a computer. And the joy of it is you can do almost anything you want to do. It's fun. What I like it because we get to take computers home and we get to work on computers at school.
I really had a chance now to do things that I'd never done before.
It just feels great to be in this class. It's like living up high.
The children are no longer feeling that they are confined to what the teacher constructs. The computer has released them academically. They work with the assignments that she's given them, but frequently I find them when I go up to check on the class branching out on their own to look at some other components. What it's done is it's tapped that ability to go in and say, I can learn some things by myself. I'm willing to listen to what you're doing, but here, look at this computer. It lets me go on without you.
Can you plug your telephone cord into the into the phone, into the, like, this the phone, this the modem?
I feel good because I like working on computers and I like working with the modem at home and getting on the bulletin board. When we get on the modem, I think that's terrific because when you get on, you can write letters or messages to someone. You communicate through the computer. And we have another diskette that the teacher gave us in the first of the year. We can communicate with each other. Like I can call my friend and tell I feel ready to connect with her on the computer. And we can write. And whatever I write will end up on her computer.
The modem is I think it changed my life because you can talk through the computer to a friend.
He feel like this is a great adventure for him. ACOT class, that said something. It said something and he heard it. He can hear what it's saying. You got a chance. You got a chance in life to be whatever you want to be. And it's just giving him so much motivation. You know, he's really enjoying it. There's no problem with him going to school and love to come home. So he can come home and get on his computer here. I am very excited to know he is into something that he's happy about. He feels good about it. Very good about ACOT. And I'm not in the class, and my husband. Oh, gosh. Now, that's a different thing, because both of them, they be fighting to get to the computer. My husband, believe it or not, my husband has taught himself to read by that computer.
Investigating how the computer can be used to extend learning from the classroom to home is a vital part of the ACOT project. Students are encouraged to use their home computers for classroom assignments, for mastering subjects and skills, and to explore the potential of the technology on their own. It's an exploration that involves the entire family.
It makes me feel more confident because I know most people in Tennessee or the United States don't know how to use a computer, and they're grown people. And I'm just a boy that's 10 years old, and I already know how to make my own diskette. They say your brain is sort of a computer, but my computer is sort of like a brain to me.
I could be a doctor, lawyer. There's a lot of things I want to be.
It's improved my style.
But with all of this talk about change, we don't want to lose sight of our roots. We believe that we've been able to lead the computer industry into this area of benevolent change because of the unswerving support of the Apple community, the users, and the developers. We see a future full of change, but we know that one thing will always remain constant. We know that you will be there with us. We haven't been able to make it without you in the past, and we figure we won't be able to make it without you in the future either. So I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much.
It may sound strange, but the very first Apple I that was ever built was actually given to a person back in the days before computers were ever heard of, who wheeled it into and taught 4th through 6th graders a little bit of the elements of what a computer is.
The virtue of the computer in the classroom is that it requires a user, not a watcher.
What we do in science is we build models. We do most of our testing with models. We do most of our thinking with models. And then later on, if we're honest, we try and relate these models back to the outside world. And these models are our voodoo dolls. They used to be built in mathematics. Now they're being built in increasing form on the computer. So simulation is what the computer is all about. And all the different ways you can simulate things are what the computer's destiny is.
The biggest problem teachers have is motivating students to want to learn. And if the computer can relieve the teacher of that burden, because the teacher today is competing with television and competing with a lot of distractions, if the teacher has that tool to bring the kids to a kind of a fever pitch of wanting to complete a task, wanting to see something accomplished successfully, then I think that this will become a tremendous resource for the teacher. It won't supplant the teacher.
Life is wonderful, huh? And you want to get that over to the kids.
Look, you can go over the top and come around to this side and look at it from the other side.
Good. Now, what about what's going on the inside?
Well, the crater up here was from an eruption a long time ago. You can see the cracks where the lava came down. Here's the top of the volcano. The crater was caused by an eruption a long time ago.
Show us where the magma is.
The part is the magma underneath the Earth's crust. Heat from the magma creates pressure against the surface of the Earth. When volcanoes erupt, the magma comes out through the cracks in the Earth's crust, and the cracks are called fissures. I knew that.
What's it really look like?
This is what a volcanic eruption looks like in real life.
So being able to speak and get natural responses, the metaphor of kind of a human personality in the computer, certainly I think that's one of the big directions that computers will go.
I need to review more recent literature. Pull up all the new articles I haven't read yet.
Journal articles only?
Fine.
Your friend Jill Gilbert has published an article about deforestation in the Amazon and its effects on rainfall in the sub-Sahara. It also covers drought's effect on food production in Africa and increasing imports of food.
Okay. Let's see. There's an article about 5 years ago, Dr. Flemson or something. He really disagreed with the direction of Jill's research.
John Fleming of Uppsala University. He published in the Journal of Earth Science of July 20 of 2006.
Yes, that's it. He was challenging Jill's projection of the amount of carbon dioxide being released to the atmosphere through deforestation. I'd like to recheck his figures.
Here's the rate of deforestation he predicted.
And what happened? He was really off. Give me the University Research Network.
The computer having very personal characteristics, speaking in a natural human voice. Elements moving on the screen as the computer describes what's happening. Still giving the advantage of a computer, which is it's interactive. The student can back up, ask a question about something, collaborate with a friend, and it doesn't run by continuously like television does.
I'm not sure to what extent computers are being used now for adult literacy, but I feel persuaded that it's a much more effective tool than the school situation for most adults, because the computer's not threatening. An adult, if you have a good program, an adult can sit down with the computer and make mistakes and not be reprimanded and not feel humiliated. Even though the teachers may not want to humiliate the student, a lot of times someone who's 30 or 40 years old is so ashamed of not being able to read that the interaction with other people may be quite intimidating, whereas the computer is not.
After filling the engine with oil, the coil wire should be grounded and the engine cranked by the starter motor What's this word?
Pressure.
Oh, pressure. Until the oil pressure gauge reads 10 pounds.
Would you like to go on to lesson 6?
No, I want to read this. The Oakland A's begin an important homestand tonight.
Well, of course, I would expect it to be able to accept speech. Keyboarding is a truly primitive way of getting information into the machine. So to begin with, I would want it to do that. Almost as important to me, and I think vitally important to the world, is I want it to do automatic translation. Even if that translation is not 100% perfect, there's no such thing. I want to be able to read books in Swedish and Japanese and Hungarian and Arabic and Hebrew and Greek and Chinese, and I can't.
Well, I think the supercomputers of today will be the desktop computers of tomorrow. And there are two kinds of things that you can do with more computing power. You can do more of what you want to do now faster, and you can occasionally do some things that you would be unthinkable to do now.
This is some pretty convincing stuff. I'll need all the ammo I can get from my meeting with Professor Thorndike and his committee of invertebrates.
Look, see how the engine creates a lot of turbulence, especially at high speeds?
So?
Well, this causes a lot of noise and also creates a certain amount of drag.
Much like?
Thorndike. The oscillation starts inside the nozzle, and the turbulence really increases outside.
Have you tried flaring the exhaust nozzle?
Sure, I've tested a lot of possible angles. I noticed that the oscillation is a lot lower when you have something like this, about 14 degrees.
We should test this. Can you talk to Gavin about a prototype of the nozzle?
Sure.
And can you add these changes to the specs?
Sure.
Can you meet with Thorndike?
Get out.
The implication of this much computing power at a very affordable cost is partly one of those because of the fact it's so radically different than anything we could have ever expected, where the very hugest supercomputers of my lifetime, early in my lifetime, are now equaled by inexpensive personal computers that you can buy everywhere and everyone can own. It's like you can't even say where is this going to go.
The ideas about hypermedia and what their possibilities can be have been around for a long time. And they have always been to be able to cut your own trails through information of your own, other people's information, weave in your stuff with other people. The trails now constitute a new kind of a book.
Select the nozzle. Modify. Let's see noise test 3 again. Okay, change the nozzle dimensions to the ones in noise test 3. Great. Let's see performance requirements. Regulations. Noise. Link the noise regulations to the nozzle dimensions. Nozzle dimensions.
I don't know what the next extension of that is, except an enrichment of it through going through, looking at a book of mine, not simply as a page of text, but also having behind that page of text is access to additional information that enriches the text.
Supplement it with documents, original source material, writings of the period, and begin to get what every historian would love to achieve, which is a real sense of the time.
So if we had a machine that we could play games with and take each subject to its farthest point, you could say to the machine, how come I love dinosaurs so much? Show me all the covers of the science fiction magazines my father and my grandfather grew up with that caused us to become scientists or technologists, to fall in love with the future, the things that make us want to live forever. That sort of machine, I think, would be absolutely incredible for a child to play with. We're all doing the same thing, same work, but we're doing it in different ways. And saying, my God, isn't this exciting? What we have here to prove that mankind has moved from here to here and can move even further to here.
Important to have the computing power to keep track of constituents.
Because with one congressman, it's very difficult geographically to cover the whole state.
There's no way that I can individually sit down and write a letter to everybody, hundreds and hundreds of people.
We need help from a computer and efficiency from a computer and reliability from a computer, and we get all of those things.
We have to cover the entire state, so we keep in contact with our constituents by the mail. We have mailing lists, lots of them with different interest codes, and we follow up mailings and let people know about things that they're interested in. At last count, we have 493,000 names on our database. Data management means a lot of things for us. It means keeping track of our names. It means keeping track of Tim's voting record. And people have really been impressed at the performance, and myself included, of the performance of the Macintosh 2 and OmniStreet Plus. On Capitol Hill, the mini computers here aren't all that, up to date, and it's one of the fastest systems.
Dave developed a correspondence management system that we think is very good, and it's been very successful in our office. I personally use the Macintosh for document creation, electronic mail. I have Macintoshes at my home, here in my office, in my district. We use it for getting in touch with databases that are available to members.
On a day-to-day basis, we use MIN, which is the Member Information Network, and that's a big mainframe computer. We're linked up with that, and we use file servers. We use Apple Share. We're totally networked. In fact, the network is an extension of our system.
Apple equipment becomes an invisible part of an office very quickly because it integrates itself so easily into the work environment of the average office person. But personally, as a hands-on item, my Mac is invaluable to me for communicating with my staff. In this office, it's the backbone of our legislative system.
When we come to session, I transported everything, my hard disk, the whole thing, plus the laser writer in the back seat of my car, which was really great fun. It took 2 weeks for the indentation of the laser writer to go out away from the upholstery of the car every time I do that. But it was the only way to have that type of reproduction here. I had people from around the community, in fact, coming into the area and would come and use my laser writer. We have amazed the people in the Capitol here for a couple of years now with graphics with the Macintosh. It got so that the people from all the different staffs would come to our office and say, do you have a fish or do you have a bicyclist or something that we put together? We're having this function and we need some kind of graphic depiction. In the clerk's office of the House of Representatives, they have Mac 2s, and that's where the journals come from.
We use our Macintosh systems for publishing, for word processing, for statistical analysis, for some database management, and also for some graphics generation. In years past, the Speaker of the House was required to get on hands and knees in his office and make committee assignments using 3x5 cards in an effort to avoid duplication of committee assignments and to ensure the proper representation of the parties and regions in the state. And it occurred to me that that would be an ideal application for an Apple system, and the speaker in 1982 decided to use it. And since that time, we've improved and enhanced for a use on the Mac 2, and we now use the color and a number of other nice features, such as the laser output and hard disk capabilities on the Mac 2. Make the whole system run much faster.
Right at the present time, I'm working on a bill tracking chart, which will track to our legislation. We have 13 prime sponsor bills this year, and so I will track them through the legislative process on computer so that the representative can also see it.
We can connect now right over to the Legislative Data Center, which is an IBM mainframe. We put a protocol converter on the front end of that big host, and with modem capability, and we just dial in there, and that's it. Piece of cake.
If a member is talking with a constituent about a certain piece of legislation and he would like to know if a staff report has been written on this particular bill, we could then call it up and transmit it to him.
I have been working to develop a database, a relational database that we can use so that we'll have one master file of information that we can plug anybody and everybody into it, from legislative issues, political issues, community issues, the whole thing. It's just, the power is unbelievable once you have it implemented.
We love it. I can't imagine our office without it.
We publish Session Weekly, which is coverage of what happens in the Minnesota House and the legislature as a whole as it affects legislation every week, and this goes out to the public on a large mailing list. Then, at the end of the session, as we followed these bills through, we do a summary of everything that became law in the state of Minnesota. What happens is the writer comes in, puts the writing on the disc gets moved to the editor, who gives it its first run through, and then she sends it over to me, and I give its final editing. Then it goes to the production person, and she puts it into PageMaker, and the final printout is we keyline onto a board, and that's the only amount of keylining that's involved with it. Those boards are picked up by a messenger and delivered to the printer about midnight on Thursday nights. We put our mailing list on, and our accounting, we keep track of all of our costs and expenses and report to leadership in the House. Prior to the Macs, we kept the records by hand on a sheet looking something like this, and kept this is figuring the expenses for the fiscal year. Now what we've done instead of that is transferred it over to the Mac, and we come up with something that gives us a daily, monthly, annual summary of what our costs are. So it has great pluses, plus the fact that we saved the House $96,000 when we added up all our publications, all our expenses. It came to about $96,000.
The computer is a necessary part of that daily tracking of where constituents are, where they live, what their problems are.
We've devised some very good formats and actual complaint forms that we can put into our printer. The information comes right out in all its adequate places, and it really simplifies our workload considerably.
I have a number of databases based on various things that we're doing in the community. I'm often involved in the arts in Long Beach and put together receptions and other types of social functions. Well, we want to keep lists of those people. We want to know who they are, and we want to know what their basis in the community is. And all of that can be kept very simply on the kind of database that we have on the Mac. The National League of Cities has services that allow us to call up and get information immediately that other cities may be working on a similar type project. That's extremely important. It's valuable. Why reinvent the wheel? If the city of Bakersfield has already learned how to solve a problem managing waste products, why should the city of Long Beach have to start all over again from scratch? There are 4 council persons who have switched to the Macintosh because they found it a solution to many of their problems.
Well, I can be creative. I can design. I have a new sense of security in what I'm producing as a representative of the councilman. because Macintosh doesn't make mistakes.
It's clearly the new age computer equipment, and I think it's good for elected officials always to try to find ways to cut down on their bureaucracies and not to build them up. You don't need a backup bureaucracy to help you run an Apple Macintosh system. Your own staff can learn how to run it themselves and master it themselves, and that makes it very useful to help make government cheaper.
Any computer would make you more productive if you know how to use it and you use it. That's the key. With a Macintosh, it's so intuitive and so easy that it makes it, it's kind of charming to be involved with that system like that and to use it.
And everybody who's ever worked in here has gone out and bought a Macintosh. Our 3 writers from last year bought Macintoshes. And our production person we had before has got acquainted with the Macintosh and the laser write printer and has gone into her own freelance business with it. So as to know them is to love them, you know.
It may not solve all the city's problems, but it'll certainly solve some of ours and allow us to free our minds to be able to do some of the important work that needs to be done.
1988 was an important year for Apple Computer and user groups. In that year, User Group 1000 was registered. That user group was the Electric Power Research Institute's Macintosh user group in Palo Alto, California.
Seven, 6, 5. We have engine start. 2, 1. 0. We have ignition and we have liftoff. Liftoff. 32 minutes after the hour, and the shuttle has cleared the tower. 7. Clear.
You see us kicking up a little bit of dust off the runway surface.
Hello, I'm James Burke. Did you know you don't have to go anywhere near a planetarium to enjoy the kind of tour I was just enjoying? A tour through NASA video disc imagery, audio, and text. What's more, my curiosity was, well, put in the driver's seat. Of course, I did have the help of what amounts to a very knowledgeable tour guide, a Macintosh, and something called a HyperCard stack. So who or what is this tour guide? HyperCard is a new tool for organizing and using information by context and association, and that's what puts me in the driver's seat, or in this case, the pilot's seat, and gives me access to the audiovisual segments of the video disc in a way which I find intuitive. For example, if while watching a launch I become curious about the crew, I ask HyperCard to find crew. And if I'm interested in Mr. Bluford, I can have HyperCard take a look.
You'll see here in a moment we've had several calls for guys for Major League Scouts looking for infielders.
HyperCard gives me the power to browse through information and find what is important to me. And it provides easy integration of video, music, voice, text, and graphics. You see, the HyperCard screen can show text and graphic information which supports, adds to, or explains the video. Special buttons enable the user to control action, pace, and sequence. Pretty hot, eh? HyperCard adds value to information by making it more accessible and interactive. You see, it's not just for browsing, it's a tool for authoring. By combining HyperCard with video discs, you can actually create interactive learning environments so that you can breathe new life into the way you communicate your ideas and wake up your students by actively engaging them. Authoring interactive video has been a complicated and tedious job performed by programmers. Now, with HyperCard, content experts and designers can get involved, taking most of the pain out of what has become an engaging task. Imagine you can use your own course outline and tie in live-action sequences, photos, schematic drawings, texts, and even sounds to illustrate points, to make presentations come alive.
In space, I eat like I do underground.
What's more, you have the full ease and power of the Macintosh and its graphics in implementing courseware. Let me show you some samples of interactive video disc applications done with HyperCard. Apple's Training Support Group created a sample stack to demonstrate a variety of different approaches to interactive video and to provide examples of scripts. A rather fascinating example, the Electric Cadaver stack, is based on the Bassett collection of anatomical images and the video book Atlas by Dr. Robert Chase. Dr. Stephen Friedman, the designer, has created a living anatomy hypertext of real value. I think I'd like a closer look at this. Starting from a section which deals with a human skull, the user can click on any region and it becomes shaded. As the view of the skull changes, the selected area remains shaded so that the user can learn to easily identify that region of the skull from any angle. A magnifying button takes the viewer, just as it has for me, in for a closer look. At any time the student chooses, he or she can review their ability to identify the various regions by clicking on the title button and removing the name of the region. Using the X-ray tool gives the user one more level at which they can see and study the complex and delicate structure of the skull. Apple's Training Support Group used Optical Data Corporation's shuttle downlink disk of NASA video. The example stack illustrates the use of creating a visual map to segments of the video disc. We can find segments about a crew member, for example, by clicking on the crew icon and then clicking on the astronaut's image. Pressing return now takes us to each instance of the astronaut on the disc. Another section of the stack allows the user to explore the manned maneuvering unit. The user puts a sequence of images into play and then uses a handy control pad to stop, start, and replay segments. A third type of example represented in the stack uses video about the Remote Manipulator System, or RMS, to illustrate an instructional sequence. The student can observe the RMS in action and then has a chance to explore and learn about its features. This Shakespeare program, developed by Larry Friedlander at Stanford University, is a rich and dramatic environment that allows a student to see, study, and compare a variety of theatre-related experiences. Behind this playbill, the student will find a study of the classical theatre. In this example, I personally chose performances, and now decide to explore the Russian version of Hamlet. By selecting the original text, I can enjoy the performance while following along with the dialogue on the Macintosh screen.
Домашний. Прощай. Если тебе непременно надо мужа, выходи за глупого. Слишком уж хорошо знает умный, каких чудищ вы из них делаете. Довольно, на этом я спятил. Никаких свадеб. Кто жил в браке, пусть состоится в супружестве. Все, кроме одного. Остальные пусть раздержатся. Пойманать не.
If I don't feel that what they're saying represents their true feelings, but that what they are thinking does, and I want to hear their inmost thoughts, known, by the way, in the theatre as the subtext, I simply return to Study Aids and select Internal Monologue. Alas, as the video plays, I am able to read what dear doomed Ophelia and the tragic and equally doomed Hamlet are really feeling. Opening the notes allows me to type in my comments or reactions or possibly references to other material. The notes can be used by the instructor as a tool when he's designing specific tours through the video, or they can be used by the student to keep a record of their research. These have been a few illustrations to whet your appetite for using HyperCard to create interactive video. For the resources and tools needed to get started, contact your Apple representative to receive the interactive video toolkit.
This video newsletter was brought to you by Apple Computer's User Group Connection. Don't forget to rewind